Coffeehouses were basically medieval Twitter, except instead of angry tweets, you had angry men with questionable hygiene screaming about politics over cups of bitter liquid that tasted like burnt sadness. These weren't cute cafés where you sip lattes and pretend to write novels. These were intellectual battlegrounds where revolutions started, empires fell, and the entire modern world got planned over terrible coffee. Kings banned them, governments feared them, religious leaders called them Satan's waiting room. And they were absolutely right, because coffeehouses didn't just serve drinks, they served up the ideas that would tear down everything. So how did places that sold bitter bean water become more dangerous than armies? Let's start in the Ottoman Empire, where drinking coffee was a capital offense, not because coffee was poison, because it was too powerful. Sultan Murad IV figured out that when people gathered to drink stimulating beverages, they started having stimulating thoughts, and stimulating thoughts led to stimulating ideas about maybe removing his head from his shoulders. Coffeehouses became hotbeds of rebellion and revolutionary plotting. His solution? Make coffee punishable by death, not imprisonment, not exile, death. Ottoman police patrolled Istanbul with orders to execute anyone caught drinking coffee. Soldiers would raid suspected coffee houses, dragging customers into the streets for public beheadings. "Sir, we found him with a cup of coffee. Off with his head." But it's decaf. Especially off with his head. People kept drinking anyway. Because apparently caffeine addiction is stronger than the fear of execution. Secret coffee houses operated like underground speakeasies. People literally risked their lives for a cup of joe, which tells you everything about how addictive this stuff really is. When coffee reached London in the 1650s, it accidentally created the world's first democratic think tanks. For 1 penny and a cup of coffee, anyone could join conversations with philosophers, scientists, merchants, and politicians. No college degree required. Just pocket change and the willingness to argue with strangers. They called them penny universities because you could get an education just by listening to the shouting matches. Each coffeehouse developed its own personality. Jonathan's Coffeehouse attracted stock traders and financial gamblers. The Grecian was where scientists gathered to argue about whether the earth was round. Will's Coffeehouse was where writers met to absolutely destroy each other's work. Your poetry is garbage, Thomas. At least I don't write like a drunk elephant, William. Gentlemen, please. More coffee? These weren't polite book clubs. These were intellectual gladiator arenas. Men would argue for hours about theology, politics, and natural philosophy. Friendships ended over debates about gravity. Scientific theories were born from coffeehouse insults. The Royal Society basically started because a bunch of guys couldn't agree on whether air had weight. Lloyd's of London, one of the world's biggest insurance markets, started because Edward Lloyd served good coffee and let ship captains post notes on his walls. Maritime traders would gather to share gossip about cargo, weather, and pirates. Lloyd started collecting shipping news and pinning it up like a medieval bulletin board. Before anyone realized what was happening, Lloyd's Coffeehouse had become the unofficial headquarters of maritime insurance. Ship owners would auction off shares of their cargo's risk to anyone willing to bet money on safe voyages. Modern insurance was born because sailors liked caffeinated gossip. The London Stock Exchange started in Jonathan's Coffeehouse when stockbrokers got tired of trading shares in the rain. They moved inside, ordered coffee, and accidentally created modern capitalism, the South Sea bubble that nearly destroyed the British economy, planned entirely in coffeehouses by men who thought investing in imaginary treasure was brilliant. Even the Bank of England traces its origins to coffeehouse meetings. A group of merchants drinking terrible coffee decided they could loan money to the government better than the government could loan money to itself. They were right. By 1675, King Charles II had seen enough. Coffeehouses were becoming too powerful, too democratic, and way too loud for his taste. He issued a royal proclamation shutting them all down, claiming they were places where the disaffected met, and spread scandalous reports concerning His Majesty. Translation: people were using coffeehouses to make fun of the king, and he didn't like it. The public response was immediate and furious. Coffeehouse customers rioted in the streets. Merchants threatened economic boycotts. Even government ministers who secretly loved their morning coffee argued against the ban. London's entire social and economic system had become dependent on caffeinated political arguments. Charles II backed down after 11 days. Coffeehouses had become too embedded in daily life to eliminate. The government had tried to ban the early internet and learned it was impossible. Coffeehouses had one massive blind spot. They banned women. This wasn't just social custom. This was deliberate exclusion from the centers of political and economic power. In 1674, a group of women published the Women's Petition Against Coffee, complaining that their husbands were spending all day in coffee houses instead of working or coming home. They argued that coffee was making men impotent and turning them into gossiping busybodies who preferred arguing with strangers to spending time with their families. "Where's your husband, Margaret?" "At the coffee house." Again, what's he doing there? Apparently solving the mysteries of the universe while ignoring his actual responsibilities. The petition was probably satirical, but it highlighted a real problem. Coffee houses were creating an entirely male-dominated public sphere where important decisions were made and women had zero voice. Colonial American coffee houses played a starring role in revolutionary politics. The Green Dragon Tavern in Boston was literally called the headquarters of the revolution. Samuel Adams and his buddies planned rebellion over coffee and ale, turning caffeine into a patriotic duty. After the Boston Tea Party, coffee became the drink of American independence. Drinking tea meant supporting British taxation. Coffee represented liberty and democratic values. Coffee houses became symbols of free speech and resistance to tyranny. The Sons of Liberty didn't just dump tea in Boston Harbor. They turned an entire continent into coffee addicts for political reasons. By the 1700s, coffee houses started losing their revolutionary edge. They became more respectable, more commercial, and significantly less dangerous. Tea became fashionable among rich people who wanted to seem sophisticated. Coffee houses either evolved into private gentlemen's clubs or transformed into taverns serving alcohol. The intellectual energy moved to universities, newspapers, and political societies. Coffee houses survived, but they stopped being the epicenter of democratic revolution and became just places to drink stuff. Today's coffee shops bear zero resemblance to their revolutionary ancestors. Starbucks turned coffee consumption into personal lifestyle branding rather than communal intellectual warfare. Modern coffee shops are designed for individual productivity, people staring at laptops instead of arguing about politics. We've completely reversed the original purpose of coffee houses. Instead of creating spaces for democratic debate and intellectual exchange, modern coffee shops help people avoid talking to each other while consuming increasingly complicated caffeinated beverages. The closest thing we have to historical coffee houses might be Twitter and Reddit. Digital spaces where people gather to share information, argue about everything, and occasionally start actual revolutions. Except instead of face-to-face conversation over simple coffee, we have anonymous screaming matches over algorithmic feeds. Coffee houses didn't just serve beverages, they served democracy. They created the first truly public spaces where your bank account mattered less than the quality of your arguments. They pioneered the radical idea that ordinary people should participate in political and economic decisions instead of just obeying orders from kings and priests. Modern democratic institutions, free press, stock markets, insurance companies, scientific societies, political parties, all have roots in coffeehouse culture. The concept that knowledge and power should be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy and well-connected, started in rooms filled with caffeinated people arguing about the news. Lloyd's of London still exists. The Bank of England still operates. The London Stock Exchange still functions, all because some guys in the 1600s liked drinking coffee while shouting about business and politics. Every time you buy coffee and sit down to work or meet friends, you're participating in a tradition that once terrified monarchs and toppled governments. Even if the most revolutionary thing happening now is someone finally finishing their dissertation while avoiding eye contact with strangers, that's not a bad legacy for bitter bean water and heated arguments.